Tonight he said her name in his sleep again. I pressed the tram brake too late. The bell on my tram is a small brass mouth that speaks only when I ask it to. Most nights, Lisbon listens. The rails curl down Alfama like silver vines. The Tagus keeps time with a quiet, tidal metronome. I keep my left hand near the brake, my right on the throttle, and a folded sketchbook between me and console, a habit I never unlearned from the year I tried to map the whole city by hand, one switch at a time. On the night I nearly kissed the bumper of a delivery van, the city was warm with the smell of oranges and rain. I had been awake too long thinking of a name that didn't belong to me. He had said it an hour earlier, turned in the bed, the sound escaping his throat like a note sung to a wrong score. A woman's name, soft as a slipper on a stage. When the syllables reached me, something inside me knocked first on my ribs, then on the tram's front glass, then on the metal world. I pulled the bell. I braked late. The tram lurched, the van squealed. Nothing broke. Still, I was ashamed to feel my heart argue for the collision, just a little. The physics would be simpler than the night. Passengers looked up from their glowing rectangles. A grandmother patted her chest and blessed me with 2 quick crosses in the air. I raised my hand in apology, lifted the tram's smile back onto the rails, and the city forgave me, as cities do, by continuing. At the next stop I see the basilica stood like a spine of old bone in the fog. 2 tourists boarded and asked for the yellow route, and I told them we are all yellow at night if we stand under enough lamps. They laughed because they thought I was joking. Their umbrellas dripped onto the rubber mat, making circles I would mop at one a datum. Before the doors closed, I saw him in the rain, crossing the street with a wooden crate pressed against his chest, his hair wet and his eyes narrowed as if the fog were a thorn. He was careful with the crate. He never looked up. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I knew that he would bring the crate into my life and it would open like a wound and also a window. But I did not know. All I saw was a man carrying glass, and the knowledge I already had, glass breaks. The city unscrolled. I eased the tram through the curve at Largo das Portas do Sol, and the tracks hummed a low lullaby the way they do when there's a little grit on them. Cats jumped gutters. I rang twice for a couple who were arguing in the road, their hands inventing alphabets the other refused to read. My route is a rosary of small mercies: wait for the cyclist, pause for the child, forgive the lost, watch the late. At Miradoro, a woman in a red raincoat sat by the railing and ate cherries from a paper bag. The seeds made a sound on the stone like someone clicking a pen to change their mind. She waved at me, and I waved back. And sometimes I think if I had stopped there, if I had put the tram to sleep and sat to watch the river throw its dark hand at the moon, everything that followed would have happened to some kinder version of me. But I am paid to move. When my shift ended, the depot yawned and swallowed the tram with a happy clank. I signed the sheet, initialed the near miss van, no contact, weather, tied my hair, and took the back stairs that smell of oil and eucalyptus cleaner. Outside, the rain had become finer, the kind that sews your clothes to the night without getting you wet. Lisbon at 2 a.m. is a city that will listen to anything you confess if you say it softly. So I did not speak. The workshop sat on the uphill corner behind the basilica, a narrow door where a brass plaque said only Vidraria, as if the word itself could hold a window together. The light was still on. I peeked through the glass, and there he was, the man from the rain, standing over a long table where the wooden crate lay open, its contents arranged like a language no one had taught me to read. Stained glass. Shattered but not ruined. Fragments of cobalt and wine, slivers of gold with black traceries like thin bones, teeth of emerald with white paint freckles where faces had once looked out of sky. He dipped a horsehair brush into a cup and moved the dust as if it were a secret he could sweep into sense. The workshop air smelled of lead and lemon. My breath fogged a small oval on the door. He looked up, not at me but toward the glass, the way people look toward a wind that knows their name. And then he saw me. Some eyes are doors, his were stairwells. You could enter and find yourself deeper than you planned to go. He smiled, shallow and surprised, as if the workshop had told him a joke in a language he almost understood. He reached for the latch. "We're closed," he said in Portuguese, polite, calling me Senhor in a voice that made the lemon in the air tilt toward sugar. "But if you need shelter." "I don't," I said. "I just wanted to see." "Ah," he said, tilting his head slightly so the black curl over his forehead moved like punctuation. "People do. with broken things. They like to watch the beginning of repair. I'm a driver, I said, as if that explained me. Not the kind who fixes. He looked past me at the street and smiled again. Even so, you bring people from one place to another. It is a sort of repair. I braked late, I said, surprising both of us. He nodded like a priest who knows confession when he hears it. Then you are human. He gestured to the table. I am Álvaro, Leah, I said, because that is my name. My mother wanted something short, one syllable you could catch even if the wind took it. He let me in. The bell on the door made the kind of sound bells make when they are trying not to be bells. I stood over the table. Pieces overlapped in a puzzle's panic. It was a window. I asked. Basilica Sagrado do Monte, he said. The storm last month ate it. I rescued what was left from the sacristy floor. Rescued, I repeated, liking the word in his mouth and in mine. And how do you need a window? By drawing what it was, he said, tapping his temple with the brush, and what it might forgive. By cutting new glass to meet it halfway. He pointed to a large sheet pinned to corkboard. Pencil lines drew a saint's robe, a hand, a gesture that meant blessing or farewell, I could not tell which. You draw the lost pieces. Yes. We both watched the fragments. The rain ticked. A thread of water ran down the outside of the window glass and found the sill's groove like a pilgrim who finally believed their map. You said her name in your sleep, I said, not as a question. The night had become a room inside a room, honesty was cheaper there. Álvaro's brush paused, lifted, and hung in the air with a small tremor, a note that needed somewhere to fall. He set it down gently. Did I? It woke me, I said. It woke the tram. The tram, he repeated, as if it, too, were a person we loved. He waited. I waited. We were two people trained by our work to stand at thresholds until something changed. He put both hands flat on the table, and light from the desk lamp made bars of his knuckles. Her name is Ines, he said finally. She is. She dances. Ballet, I guessed, because the syllables he had spoken an hour earlier had been vowels with strings attached. He nodded. She toured. Europe, America. Sometimes the world is big enough to keep you from yourself. But then it ends in the same place it began, which is you, with all your knowing. And now, she is in Madrid. She writes sometimes. Cities make people write. They make people forget, too. He looked up at me. I am speaking too much. Maybe, I said. But the glass is listening. He laughed, the kind of laugh that lifts the dust. I liked the sound. I liked, less, the way the name Ines sat between us like a chair nobody wanted to move because it was old and expensive. Would you? He began, then stopped, shook his head as if moving a thought into a drawer. It is late. You should sleep. Drivers need hands that can rest. Cartographers do, too, I said, tapping the sketchbook I had tucked under my coat. He looked at the cover, where a spray of graphite lines had become a small muscle of streets. You draw maps, he said. For the tram, for my head, I said. To put order into a city that resists it. Cities do not resist, he said. They just love another way. Is that what Ines does? I asked, and the question was a darker thing than I meant it to be. He did not flinch. He placed a small rectangle of cobalt in my palm. You tell me, he said. What color is the piece missing from you? I closed my fingers around the glass. It was cold with the river. When I opened my hand, a blue square sat on my skin like a square of night. I lifted it to the corkboard, the place where the saint's robe opened into air, and without meaning to, I set it there, where it did not fit, and never would, a sky pretending to be cloth. It doesn't belong, I said. Not yet, he said. But sometimes we begin with the wrong piece to understand why the right ones matter. The lamp's circle of light made an island around us. We stood on it and looked outward to a sea of things that needed choosing. If there were a map of that, I would have drawn it, the coastline of staying, the bay of turning back, the narrow channel of forgiveness with its rocks named after and again. I left with the smell of lead and lemon following me down the steps. At the door, he said my name once, as if he were testing it in the air for fracture lines. Good night, Leah. Good night, Álvaro, I said, and tried not to hear the name he had said before mine, the one that would arrive again, as names do, uninvited, and perfectly on time. Outside, the basilica breathed its ancient, patient breath. I touched my tram's brass bell with 2 fingers, the way people touch the feet of saints for luck, and I promised the rails I would be kind to them tomorrow. The city's lights shivered on the wet stones. Somewhere, the river turned in its sleep. When I reached home, the bed had cooled into discipline. I laid down on my side and faced the window. A gull cried, an argument with nobody. I did not close my eyes. I waited for morning, for the hour when the sky bleaches itself of mistakes and offers you a color you can begin with. It was then near dawn that I understood something simple and ruinous. Álvaro had given me a question, and I had given him nothing. Inés existed like a hinge between us, one those medievals would make of iron, so that doors could swing forever without falling off. I wondered which one of us was the door, which the frame, and which the city waiting for the sound. I fell asleep for an hour. In that hour I dreamed I opened the wooden crate and found not glass, but maps, of Lisbon, yes, but also of bodies, of rooms we had not entered yet, of conversations we would have to leave in the middle because light changes in tiles and makes you late. I folded the maps and put them into my mouth the way saints put fire there to prove something to people who had already decided. When the alarm spoke, I took a shower and nothing water could remove. I drank coffee. I tied my hair. I went to work. At SE, the basilica watched me pass as if I were a line it might keep or erase. Near noon, a folded note waited on the driver's seat. No envelope, no seal, just a word on the outside that was not my name. Inés. I opened it because I had learned from glass that you can touch a sharp thing and not die. Inside, the hand was narrow and precise, the way women write when they have trained their bodies to be obedient. Álvaro, it said in Spanish, I dreamed Lisbon again. The cracked window, the lemon on your hands, the way you looked at the floor when I told you I would go where the music is. I will be in your city for one night only. The gala ends at 11. If there is a key still near the lamp, I will use it. If not, I will dance with memory. That is a kind of partner too. There was no signature. There did not need to be. The letter had not been addressed to me, but the city had decided it was, and cities are very good at delivering messages to those who most dread receiving them. I folded the paper, slowly, carefully, the way I fold my maps when I know the crease I make will decide what can be seen and what must wait. I placed it back on the seat. I rang the bell. The tram moved. At Largo de Graca, a girl boarded with a violin case. She paid and asked if I believed that instruments could smell like the rooms they've played. I told her yes, even silence has a scent if the windows are clean. She smiled as if she had been offered proof. When she sat, she held the case the way Álvaro had held the crate near the heart, with the threat and promise of sound. Round the curve, the rails sang again. I listened for the name in their metal, and for a second I thought I heard my own. Then the city forgave me, again, by continuing. He didn't ask why I came back, and I didn't tell him that sometimes silence feels safer than the truth. The next evening, I drove the tram as if the city might speak first. Lisbon's night air smelled of wet iron and distant music, the kind that leaks from taverns when doors don't close all the way. The passengers blurred together. Tourists with paper bags of roasted chestnuts, a girl clutching her cat in a raincoat, an old man counting rosary beads between stops. Everyone was moving towards something. I was only circling the same hill again and again, pretending that motion was purpose. When the last passenger stepped off at the basilica stop, I let the tram idle, engine humming like a cat with a secret. The fog pressed close, breathing against the windshield. I told myself I would stay only a minute. Just enough to stretch, maybe to look up at the basilica lights and then, perhaps, to see whether the window on the workshop corner was still glowing. It was. A small rectangle of amber light in the wet dark, like a wound refusing to heal because someone kept touching it. I told myself stories to make my decision reasonable. I owed him thanks for letting me in last night. I should apologize for intruding. I could even return the blue glass piece if he wanted it back. But truth was smaller, sharper. I simply wanted to see if he would smile again. He did. The bell chimed when I entered. The sound settled between us like a memory pretending to be air. Álvaro looked up from the table, sleeves rolled high, wrists dusted with fine white powder. Lead paint. Plaster. Whatever it was, it looked like snow that had forgotten how to melt. You came back, he said softly, almost a question. I drive past anyway, I said, as if routes were excuses. He gestured toward a stool. Then sit. Let me show you what glass remembers. He lifted one pane emerald, long as a forearm, cracked through the middle and held it over a tracing of the saint's robe. Light from the desk lamp shone through the break, splitting the pattern into twin rivers. See here? He said. The crack follows the painted fold, as if it knew where to break. Sometimes damage is loyal, yes. It follows design, not chaos. I watched the light bleed through the crack. It turned the paper beneath into a map of pain, precise and almost beautiful. You sound like a priest, I said. He smiled. And you sound like someone who doesn't believe in repair. I believe in roots, I said. Not in returns. He looked at me long enough for the rain to start again. Maybe they are the same thing, if you drive long enough. I wanted to ask about Ines, whether she ever came back, whether loyalty could survive distance, but his voice softened as he began humming something low. It wasn't a song I knew, just a melody carried in the rhythm of his work. Each cut of glass made a note, each brushstroke a rest. The workshop became a kind of church, with light instead of prayer. Do you ever listen to the tram bells? I asked. Every night, he said. They sound like punctuation marks between silences. And what do they say? That someone is still awake. He placed the emerald piece aside and reached for a sheet of amber glass. Would you like to try? I hesitated. I'll break it. You will, he said, calm. That's how you learn the weight. He guided my hand to the glass cutter. His palm was warm, steady, the kind of hand that believed in consequences but never feared them. Under the pressure, the glass sang a high, nervous sound. I flinched. Keep going, he murmured. The sound means it's listening. The blade drew a line, clean and trembling. He snapped the piece in two, effortlessly. One half gleamed like honey, the other like smoke. There, he said. Now it knows where it ends. Doesn't that make it weaker? No, he said. It makes it defined. The ear smelled of lemon oil and tin. His hair curled against his temple, glinting when he leaned close. I could have counted the shadows of his lashes. My pulse followed the hum of the small heater in the corner. He lifted the half I'd cut and fitted it beside another fragment. See. It fits because it's not perfect. I looked at the joint edges, at the fine silver line of solder he brushed across the seam. It'll hold, if I do it right, he said. Even cracks can be made beautiful. He didn't mean glass. Ours must have passed. The rain stopped, started again. The workshop grew warmer, the windows fogged. He made coffee, thick and bitter, poured it into mismatched cups. We talked about meaningless things, street noise, the taste of dust, how the basilica bells never ring on time. But every word felt like a way to avoid saying her name. When I finally stood, my palms were stained with faint traces of blue and green, like I'd been touching weather. You should sleep, he said. Your trams will need you. And you, he smiled faintly. Glass never sleeps. It just waits to be seen. Outside, the fog had thinned. I turned once at the corner. Through the window, he was still standing at the table, bent over the design, a shape of devotion in a cage of light. I walked back toward the rails, holding the blue piece he'd given me the night before. It caught a shard of streetlight and burned quietly in my hand. When I reached the tram yard, I realized something simple. I wasn't driving in circles anymore. I was orbiting. And he was the city I couldn't map. Her posters went up overnight. By morning, even the walls were looking at her. The city woke with tape on its teeth. Along the tram line, glossy rectangles had bloomed on stone and stucco, their corners bitten down by the same gray adhesive that holds elections and lost-cut notices to the world. A woman leapt inside each rectangle, caught midair, chin lifted, the delicate violence of a body that had practiced the art of leaving the ground. Her name was printed in a serif that knew it was beautiful. Ines Aranda, one night font was a little too elegant for our street. Lisbon tried it on anyway. So did I. Passengers pointed. A boy mimed the pose and almost toppled on a step. An old woman scowled and muttered something about shoes too thin for a sane winter. A conductor from another line climbed aboard at Marta Manas just to ask if I'd seen the one where the ruffles looked like a wave. She's dancing at Sao Carlos, he said. All the tickets are gone. Sold in a day. People like leaving the ground, I said, and rang the bell. At SE, the basilica watched me the way buildings watch people who have secrets not meant for stone. I braked cleanly this time, but my hands remembered the night I hadn't. The posters remembered the night he said her name. I finished my shift with my mouth full of gum and weather, the way I do when thinking is a thing not to be trusted. At the depot, the metal yawned. I signed, tied my hair, and left through the back stairs. The workshop's window was a sheet of evening, the lamp inside, a star caught in glass. Álvaro looked like the verb for repair. He didn't notice me at first. He was leaning over the table, both hands braced on either side of a design that had deepened since I'd last seen it. The saint's robe had become a river, the hand, once gesture, was now blessing, no, not blessing. Something like permission. A cloud of cut shards haloed his wrists. The air was the color of tin. Boa noite, I said, and the bell answered, as if there were rules for sound and manners both. He looked up, the kind of smile that arrives before the rest of the face. Leah. I stepped closer to the table. The city is wearing her like perfume, Ines. He tried the name carefully, as if someone else might be listening. Forgiveness, maybe. I saw the posters at dawn. The printer used the old photo. She hates that one. She's beautiful in it, I said, because the truth is an impolite guest that still deserves to eat. He nodded without agreeing. She is better now. We stood a moment in the soft saw of the small heater. I perched on the stool. He pointed at a long wedge of ruby glass. Hold this edge for me. Our fingers met in the middle without choreography. São Carlos, I said casually. I heard it's sold out. I can still stand up in the back, he said. They leave room for ghosts. Do ghosts clap? They don't need to. His mouth tilted. They already know the ending. I thought of endings the city had fed me. Doors closing on the last ferry, the way a tram's brake sighs at 4 a.m., rain deciding not to become snow again. I didn't want a ghost's ending. I wanted a map's lines you could follow twice and call it new. He soldered the seam, breath held. The tin cooled to a thin silver line. I'll go, he said at last, and it was less a choice than gravity. Of course, I answered, as if my chest were not an instrument tuned to his verbs. He set the iron down. Do you think less of me for loving something that has already left? I drive a loop all night and call it progress, I said. I am not allowed to judge. He turned the panel, tested its weight, slid it into a wooden frame with a carpenter's indulgence for fit. I told you damage can be loyal, he said. So can memory. That doesn't make it wise. What does it make it? I asked. Mine, he said, softly enough that the lamp had to lean in to hear. The theater is a different kind of church. At 10:45, an hour and change before the note on the letter said the gala would end, I let my route carry me as near to São Carlos as the rails allowed. The streets were already shining with well-dressed footsteps. Men in dark coats practiced patient faces. Women shook rain from silk as if water were a rumor. A trio of students smoked under an awning, rehearsing opinions out loud for the walk home. I idled at a stop and pretended to check a signal. I listened. I could not hear her music, only the city's, the creak of a wet sign, the mutter of a late bus, but I felt the theater taking breath. Buildings do this when they are about to exhale applause. Somewhere across that square, Álvaro stood where ghosts stand. I tried to picture his shoulders in the dark. I tried not to picture the rest. I finished my shift. I cleaned the tram's rubber mat, the circles of someone else's weather on the floor. I went home, showered in an hour I could not remove, changed into a sweater that had learned my shape. Then I walked. The theater lights punched small, obedient holes in the fog. A line of black umbrellas had cued like punctuation commas for small talk, exclamation points for expensive perfume. A period for the door where staff slipped in and out with trays of glass that was meant to be broken, but only by lips. I stood outside the side entrance, neither brave enough for the front nor cowardly enough for home. The posters stared with their old photograph. When the doors opened and people poured out like temperate weather, I stepped back into the deeper dark. I saw him first. He emerged with the last of the late clappers, hair damp, collar crooked, a man who had forgotten to dress for the after-party because he had only dressed for sight. He stopped just past the awning, looked up at the sky as if rain were news. And then I saw her, half in shadow, half in the light that wants what the stage has touched. Ines wore a long coat over a dress that seemed to be made out of a whisper. Her face was smaller than the poster but larger than memory. No makeup, or the kind so exact it felt like truth. She laughed at something a man beside her said. The laugh was low and owned, the sound of someone who knows which rooms have her name on them. Álvaro turned, and the distance between them closed as a matter of physics. I could have left. My body even performed the first step of it: pivot, weight on the heel, city to the right. But the night had arranged itself so carefully, as if rehearsed by a director who liked Slowick. I stayed where the shadow from a lamp-post cut a line across my shoes. I let the reunion happen to me. Ines, he said, and yes, the name was different here, outdoors, when it did not have to share air with mine. Álvaro, she answered, with the mild surprise of someone discovering an old key still fits. He didn't touch her. She didn't touch him. They looked like people taught by art to let the space between say the warmest things. You were there, she said. I am often a ghost, he answered. She smiled. Not tonight. For a moment I hated all the languages I do not speak. They talk the way people talk when a friend has died and the funeral is finished, softly, with a portion of voice kept in reserve for something the throat cannot afford. He asked about Madrid. She asked about the basilica window. He told her the storm had been greedy. She told him the ocean in his city was different from other oceans because it remembered sailors' names. He said he'd always thought so. She didn't disagree. And then there was a change, a small one. You would miss it if you didn't spend nights listening to rails confess. But her gaze flicked past him, briefly, to the poster behind his shoulder. It was the old photograph, the one she hated. A crease had formed in the lower corner. She reached up and smoothed it with 2 fingers, a reflex of ownership tender and terrible. Álvaro watched that touch like rain. Come, said the man beside her, gaunt, a scarf with the kind of careless knot that is a practice, not an accident. The reception. She looked at Álvaro the way dancers look at the wings, where the stage ends and you gather the rest of your breath. There's a key by the lamp. He hesitated. The city leaned in with all its balconies. There is, he said. Good, she said. No promise. Only the future phrased in the grammar of doors. She left, escorted by the scarf. Álvaro stood a long minute. I counted 3 streetcar bells, a bus sigh, the inventory of a waiter's tray. He lifted his hand not to wave, but to test the wet in the air, as if it might spell something on his palm. I stepped out of the shadow. He didn't startle. That felt worse. You came, he said, as if tonight were a place and not a time. Roots, I said, with a smile that fit poorly. Did you hear? He asked. The city breathed, I said. That was enough. He looked down the street toward the hill that would take him home. I could see the thought move across his face like a cloud, the key, the lamp, the floorboards that knew the weight of his steps. We both knew he would go. We both wanted him not to. Both things can live in a night. Leah, he said, and the name had to fight for shape after hers. Would you? Don't be kind to me, I said, gently. It makes people cruel to themselves. The words surprised me with their adult teeth. He blinked. Somewhere, the poster glue loosened in the humidity. The photograph shivered. What should I be? He asked. Whatever you already decided, I said. The decision is the only honest part. He nodded, because craftspeople respect choices that have edges. The window will survive you, he said, a sentence that meant nothing true and everything necessary. Glass remembers, I said. And maps forgive, he answered, and we were suddenly so brave for strangers. We parted like pedestrians, a choreography of opposite corners and polite distances. He walked toward the hill. I walked toward the river, where the night puts all the names it cannot hold. It is an easy thing to lie to a city. You just speak softly and keep moving. I told Lisbon I would go home. I told the posters I would not look. I told the basilica I had run out of prayers. Then I turned left where I should have turned right and climbed toward the workshop with my heart counting in a language my mouth could not pronounce. From the street I could see the square of light on his floorboards. The lamp had been lit. There was a second shadow inside the room, longer, smoother, a silhouette in the shape of a choice taken all the way to its end. I did not stop. I did not call his name. I was not owed the wreckage of the truth. I walked past the door and let the night protect its own. At the tram yard, I sat on the first step of my sleeping car and opened the blue square he had given me on that first night. It caught a filament of depot light and threw it back like a kept promise. I placed it on my tongue, the way a child tests river water carefully, ready to spit. The glass tasted like nothing but temperature. I laughed once, and the laugh ran up into the cables overhead and came back thinner, like a version of me that had learned to be quiet in polite rooms. On the seat beside me lay the note I'd already memorized, the one I had no right to keep. I folded it again. I made a new crease. I added a small map in the margin, a line from a lamp to a door, from a door to a table, from a table to a woman lifting her hand toward a poster to smooth the corner where a city had begun to peel. When I finally slept, it was with my palm open, as if the blue could choose to leave on its own. In the morning, a tourist asked me how to get to São Carlos. I told him to follow the music. He frowned. But there is none during the day. There's always music, I said. Sometimes it just stays inside the walls. Do you like the ballerina? He asked, as if preference were a stop I could call out. I like windows, I said. They show you what the light thinks of you. At noon, I passed the poster with the loosened corner. Someone had smoothed it again. The tape held. The paper shone. Her name looked newer than the stone it lay against. I rang the bell. The tram moved. The rails sang the small song they sing when a weight heavier than a decision is approaching. I knew what Chapter 4 would be called, if my life had titles, the Basilica Test. And I knew what would fail first. The saints had lost their faces. I wondered when we had, too. Morning in Lisbon tastes like tin and orange peel. The basilica's bell rang a minute early, as if time itself had stumbled on the cobblestone. My shift was half over when the maintenance manager waved me down at a sea station. The basilica restoration needs transport, he said. Crates of glass for delivery. Glass. Of course. I agreed before common sense could protest. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe cruelty disguised as kindness. The crates would come from Álvaro's workshop. I told myself that coincidence was simply fate with poor handwriting. When I reached the side street, the air already shimmered with the smell of solder and citrus oil. Álvaro was outside, sleeves rolled to the elbows, loading the final crate into a cart. He looked more tired than the day before, the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleep, but from decisions made at night. Need a driver? I asked. He startled, then smiled, the sort of smile that knows it shouldn't appear and comes anyway. Leah, you shouldn't have to lift holy things. I drive everything, I said. Even saints, apparently. He chuckled softly, but the sound died quickly. Thank you. It's only 3 crates. 3, I echoed. 1 for each mistake we're about to make. He didn't ask what I meant. Inside the basilica, light dripped through scaffolding like slow honey. The shattered window loomed above us, a ribcage missing its heart. Dust hung in rays so visible I could almost touch the centuries between us. Álvaro set the first crate down gently, like an offering. We rebuild the top arch today, he said, but his voice carried a distance that had nothing to do with acoustics. Where's your helper? I asked. He paused. She's sleeping, he said. I didn't need the name. The air told me. I climbed the narrow ladder anyway. The metal groaned under my boots. He followed, a pain in his hands glinting like frozen sea. We reached the wooden platform that faced the ruined arch. Hold it steady, he said, and passed the glass to me. I did. The color bled through my palms, ruby, gold, green, a cathedral of veins that did not belong to my body. Careful, he murmured, that one's fragile. So are we, I said before I could stop myself. He glanced at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the basilica disappeared. There was only light and 2 people standing in it, pretending the cracks weren't part of the design. When we descended, the foreman called for a break. Workers smoked in the courtyard, shadows long on the cobblestones. I sat on the edge of the fountain, dipping my fingers in the water until I couldn't feel their tremor. Álvaro joined me, carrying 2 cups of bitter coffee. Inés helped choose the colors, he said quietly. Years ago, before she left. She said glass should breathe like skin. She was right, I said. Skin breaks, too. He smiled faintly. You don't like her. I don't know her. That's not an answer. No, I admitted, it's a confession. He set his cup down. You think I'll go to her tonight? I think you already did, I said. He didn't deny it. His silence was a line drawn cleanly through the truth. Later, when the day cooled, we lit candles for the saints whose faces were still missing. The new panels caught the flame and flung it back in fractured halos. Álvaro stood beside me, staring up at the work. "She'll see this tonight," he said. "At the gala dinner, there'll be photos. The bishop wants to show progress." "She, Ines," he said softly. "She always loved this window." I swallowed. "Then you should be proud." He turned to me. "Of the work, yes. Of myself, no." Something in me cracked with the glass. When the others left, we stayed behind to clean the dust. The basilica without voices felt heavier, like a cathedral underwater. He lifted a ladder, set it aside, then reached for the last crate. It was empty, only the soft imprint of straw and one loose shard of pale blue at the bottom. He picked it up and handed it to me. "Keep it. It doesn't fit anywhere." I laughed once. A piece without purpose, or waiting for one. Our hands brushed. I felt the small electric cruelty of almosts. "Why me?" I asked. "Why keep giving me your broken glass?" He hesitated. "Because you look like someone who might forgive it." "And do you?" "I try," he whispered. "But glass is easier than people." Then he kissed me. Not the way lovers do, no urgency, no promise, just the quiet collision of two apologies. It was over before my breath knew what to do. He stepped back first. "I shouldn't have, I know," I said. "But neither should I." He looked at me as if memorizing guilt. "She leaves tomorrow." "Then go," I said. "Go before you start looking for her and me." I turned toward the door. He didn't follow. That night, the city was all mirrors. Shop windows caught reflections of people I wasn't. Every tram bell sounded like his name. I stopped by the workshop once, only once. The door was half open, the light inside low. 2 cups sat on the table. A woman's scarf hung on the chair I used to sit on. And through the thin wall, I heard the faintest sound, laughter, tired and intimate, the kind that belongs to people who no longer need to explain why they stayed. I left before the sound could finish. The basilica stood silent behind me, its saints glowing with borrowed faces. And I thought, maybe faith isn't about believing in heaven. Maybe it's about watching something break and deciding to love it anyway. The applause ended, but the night kept asking for more. The word encore is greedy. It means again when your body has already spent its breath. It means stay when the music has already said go. Lisbon wore wet gold that night. A rain as fine as thread stitched the city together, roofs to rails, windows to water, past to pulse. I drove my loop with a mouth that would not decide whether to sing or bite. Every stop held a small congregation of umbrellas. Every bell felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence I did not write. Near São Carlos, a spill of people drifted from the doors as if the theater were a lung. The posters had gained a second line in black marker. Brava! Someone had drawn a star. Someone else, a heart. I slowed the tram though no signal asked me to, as if my hands knew to be gentle with aftermath. Álvaro stood beneath the colonnade as though the stone had grown him there. He had that underwater look again, eyes reflecting a music I couldn't hear. A stage door opened, laughter, metal, wheels, perfume, a shout that wanted to be secret. Then she stepped out. No tutu. No myth. Just Ines in a dark coat and a dress that moved like language. The scarf man hovered, then evaporated under a smile mortals obey. Her hair was damp at the edges, as if the night had rehearsed touching her and got only so far. When she saw Álvaro, all the lights turned cooperative. They did not rush. People who practice leaving the ground do not rush on earth. He walked toward her, she met him halfway, the city filled in the rest. I let the tram idle too long. The conductor on the next line tapped 2 fingers to his cap. Move along. I moved. My route curved a block away, then another, and still my body turned back toward that door like a needle to a known north. The workshop lamp was on. I did not knock. Some rooms are not improved by witnesses. I stood across the street under the rain's thin hands, watching light shape their shadows into a grammar I pretended not to read. 2 figures at a table. 2 cups. A small eclipse when one leaned over the other's shoulder to look. A pause where the key by the lamp disappeared into a pocket that had always been meant for it. After a time that refused to be called minutes, the lamp went lower. The silhouette slowed, then simplified, then vanished beyond the frame of the window. The dark that followed was the expensive kind, paid in certainty. I walked. My legs understood, even when the rest of me still negotiated terms with air. At the depot, I signed the log, wrote nothing in the box that said incidents, tied my hair, untied it, tied it again. Sleep waited like a closed mouth. I went home and lay beside the part of the bed where another life might have cooled. The ceiling breathed. My body didn't. When I rose before dawn, the city had not yet made up its face. I brewed coffee that tasted like an argument, took my sketchbook, and went to the basilica on foot. The scaffolding was a rib cage that owed me nothing. In the nave, the unfinished window held night like a bowl. I climbed to the platform and sat where day would arrive first, legs numb in the patience of stone. I took out the blue square of glass and set it on the saint's penciled robe, far from any fit. The square made its own weather. The saint did not object. Encore, I told the empty church. Do it again. Make it new. The word sounded foolish without clapping to dress it. A door opened below. I startled and pocketed the blue. A caretaker shuffled in, coughed into his sleeve, lit 2 candles for a saint who had borrowed someone else's face. He did not look up. I envied him. By the time the bell rang the hour, I had decided what I was capable of. I would not compete with a ghost that had learned to dress itself and walk. I would not be the room someone came through on the way to someone else. I would become a place with doors of my own. At noon, I saw Álvaro at the workshop door. The morning had been rinsed from him, what remained was polished fatigue. He was kind to a passerby who asked about repairs, kinder than the day required. When he saw me, he did not pretend surprise. "Leah," he said, a word that remembered last night too well. "How was the encore?" I asked, not to hurt him but because language needs a reason to stand. He looked at his palms. Solder glinted in a long, pale vein. "Loud," he said. And then quiet. "She leaves today," I said. "Madrid does not forgive tardiness. Madrid forgives anything that feeds it," he answered, and the line was not about cities. One held up the blue square. "It still doesn't fit." "It might never," he said. "Some pieces are only here to teach the others their shape. Then I should put it away." He hesitated. "Or keep it where you can see it and not mistake it for a promise." We stood with the kind of silence that has bones. A truck passed, a tourist laughed, a gull made a sound like a door pulled too hard. Finally he said, "Last night I remembered the smell of lemon on my hands from the first time we worked on this window together. The body is a bully. It votes with nostalgia." "And you?" I asked. "Did you vote?" His mouth made a careful shape. "I said encore once," he answered. "And once was enough." I could not tell whose mercy that was. His, hers? "Mine. You kissed me in a church," I said, "because knives sometimes need air." "I asked to be forgiven by a person instead of a god," he said. "That was my mistake." He looked past my shoulder toward the hill. There was a small animal, panting. "She'll pass by to say goodbye," he added, almost like an apology to time. "And you, I'll do what I've already done," he said. "Finish the arch. Carry the crates. Hang a key where a lamp can find it. And after," he breathed, "the kind you make when the glass cuts, but you pretend it's weather. After, I'll work. Work forgives what love keeps the ledger for." I wanted to be noble, or brave, or at least exact. All I managed was civil. "I'm glad you remember how to solder." "I am less glad," he said softly, "that I remember how to want." We did not say good luck. We did not say stay. He went inside. I turned toward the rails. The day hung like wet laundry. I drove. The city moved. At Martamanas, a boy tried the poster pose again and didn't fall this time. At Graca, the girl with the violin smiled shy and put the case on the seat beside her like a sleeping animal. At Alfama, a woman poured oranges from a sack into the stall's tilted crates, the fruit rolling toward each other as if they'd agreed in advance. Near evening, São Carlos exhaled one last time. No crowd, no bravo, only a taxi's brake and two people who had not rehearsed the exit. Inés looked smaller in daylight, and somehow more dangerous for it. She touched Álvaro's sleeve, not to own but to confirm. He said something that made her tilt her head, a dancer measuring the angle of a memory. She handed him nothing to keep. He gave her the easy cruelty of permission. They did not kiss. Some endings are too proud for that. She got in the car. It moved. The city closed its mouth like a book finished out of order. Álvaro stood a while, hands in his pockets, head tilted the way saints are carved when the sculptor wants to imply mercy. Then he turned uphill, toward the basilica. I let the tram ring once. He did not look. The bell is a small mouth, it does not insist. Night again. Rain again. The kind of repetition that makes life survivable. I stopped at the workshop on my final pass. He was inside, working. The window glowed like a wound remembering sunlight. He didn't see me. I did not enter. I raised the blue square in my palm and let the lamp catch it. For a moment, we were all the same color, the saint, the glass, the part of me that would learn how to leave. Encore, I said, this time to myself alone. But for me, I walked home by the long way, the one that lets the river speak into your bones and makes you believe the tracks are lines you drew on purpose. By the time I slept, my decision had learned my shape. Tomorrow, I would resign from the night line. And the day after, I would take the interview in Porto I had not yet admitted to wanting. Maps could become professions. Or salvations. Maybe both. When I dreamed, the basilica was whole. It did not need my hands. The tram moved forward. No one asked it to go back. Some mistakes are loud. Others arrive gently, like mercy pretending to be rain. 2 days after the gala, the city forgot how to stop. It rained, the kind of rain that doesn't fall, it settles, quietly, into clothes, into hair, into the spaces between things that thought they were safe. I had resigned the night before. The letter sat folded in the depot's brass box, unread, like a heart placed in an envelope with no address. This would be my last shift on the night line. One more loop before leaving the rails that had memorized my size. The tram hummed through Alfama's wet lungs. My passengers were the faithful few, lovers escaping hotels, old men with paper bags of bread, a stray dog who rode 2 stops and then decided it didn't matter where it got off. I told myself I wouldn't pass the basilica. That I would end the line early, make my last loop shorter, lighter. But routes have memory. They guide you even when you refuse to look. At SE station, the street lamp was half dead, flickering like a pulse after confession. And there he was. Álvaro stood near the curb, soaked through, coat clinging to him like an apology. He held something in both hands, a pane of glass wrapped in cloth, taller than his arm. The tram slowed of its own will. He stepped forward as if the rails might move for him. I braked too late. The screech that followed was almost tender. Metal crying against metal, sparks flashing like startled angels. The tram shuddered and stopped a breath from his knees. The passengers gasped. One woman dropped her umbrella, a small drowned moon. I threw the lever into neutral, pushed open the door, and ran into the rain. Are you insane? I shouted. My voice bounced off the basilica wall, then came back smaller. He blinked, water streaking down his temple. Probably, he said. I was bringing you something. I looked at the wrapped pane. The cloth had come loose at one corner beneath it, a bloom of cobalt and gold. You could have died, I said. I almost did once already, he answered. Last night, when I realized silence is also a kind of answer. He lifted the glass, careful as a prayer, and set it on the tram step. It's finished, he said. The last piece. I wanted you to see it before you left. The streetlight flickered again. I saw his face the way cities remember people in fragments. I don't understand, I said. Why bring it here? Because this line is where you exist, he said simply. And everything I made is because you stopped long enough to look. The rain made rivulets down the glass, weaving gold veins where none had been drawn. Behind us, the basilica bells began to toll not the hour, but the warning. A storm swelling from the river. He smiled faintly. Seems fitting. Lightning opened the sky like a door too bright to enter. Get on, I said, nodding to the tram. You'll drown out here. He hesitated, then obeyed. We rode in silence. The tram clicked through puddles, wheels spitting small oceans. The air smelled of copper and fear. When we reached Miradoro, the wind lifted the power lines into song. He spoke without turning his head. I didn't go after her. I gripped the brake. You don't have to tell me that. Yes, he said, but I want to tell you. He turned. His eyes looked lighter, like glass thinned by fire. I thought love was about keeping something from breaking. But you showed me how it's sometimes letting it break cleanly, so it can catch light again. I laughed once, rah. You're a poet now, no, he said. I'm a coward learning honesty too late. We reached the final curve. The rails were slick. I should have slowed, but the storm had rewritten physics. The tram skidded. A wheel left the track for half a breath, then found it again. But not before a sound sharp, like a glass pane surrendering cut the air. We stopped halfway up the hill. The lights flickered out. In the dark, something cracked, not the tram, not the glass. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "No," he said. "Only the piece." We stepped out. Rain found us instantly. The pane leaned against the seat where he'd left it. A long fracture split it down the center, clean as a verdict. The saint's face, newly painted, newly born, was divided between sorrow and mercy. Álvaro knelt, tracing the break with his thumb. "It's loyal," he murmured. "Just like the first one." I crouched beside him. "It's ruined." He shook his head. "No. It's complete." The wind carried the basilica bells again, warped by distance. I felt the rails hum beneath my knees, the city whispering, "Move." I touched his shoulder. "Álvaro." He looked up. "Yes, go back," I said. "Fix it again. Without me this time." He smiled, small, tired, true. "You leave, then." "I already have," I said. I stood. The tram waited, the power returned with a sigh. I climbed aboard, pulled the lever, and felt the wheels catch the line. Through the window, I saw him lift the cracked pane and walk toward the basilica, the rain folding around him like forgiveness. When the tram reached the next turn, I pressed the bell once, twice, a goodbye only the city would hear. The rails sang the rest. Love didn't end. It was simply edited out, like a wrong line on good paper. Lisbon gave me a clear dawn the morning after the storm. The streets steamed like the city was trying to dry its sorrow. Somewhere, the basilica bell rang a half-minute late, and I smiled. Even time needed to catch its breath. I had slept 2 hours at most. Dreams kept folding in on themselves. Blue glass, his voice, a tram bell ringing where no tram ran. When the sky began to pale, I dressed and went to the depot one last time. The letter accepting my resignation had been slipped under the office door. Effective immediately, it read, with a small polite mercy, "We wish you well on your next route." Next route. They had no idea how true that was. I cleaned my locker, 2 pencils, 1 map, a cracked watch face I'd meant to fix. I left my uniform neatly folded on the bench. It looked like someone had evaporated. At 9, I walked to the workshop. The rain had bleached the cobblestones to silver. The door was ajar, as if the night hadn't finished deciding whether to end. Álvaro sat at the table, the broken pane propped beside him. It was no longer blue and gold. The crack had spread, hairline veins crawling like frost. Yet he had drawn along the fracture with silver leaf, tracing it the way rivers remember deltas. He looked up. His face was calm in that frightening way people get when they've chosen something irreversible. "You're leaving," he said. "I already did." "Where?" "Porto first," I said. "There's a job at a cartography office. They make atlases for export. I think I could learn to draw the world and not just the routes I drive." He nodded slowly. "You always knew where to go." "No," I said. "I just learned when to stop." He smiled a little, as if the phrase deserved to be framed. On the table, an envelope lay beside the silver pen. My name, in his slanted handwriting. "I wrote something," he said. "It isn't apology. Or confession. Maybe it's a repair you can't see. I'm not sure I should take it." "Then it will wait," he said simply. I touched the envelope anyway. The paper was warm, as if it had been breathing. "I came to say goodbye," I said. "Then don't say it," he answered. "Just go. Goodbyes make things sound finished when they're only changed." He rose, walked to the window, and opened the shutters. Light fell over us like approval. The cracked pane glowed where silver met color. The damage had become design. I whispered, "You fixed it." "No," he said. "I just stopped fighting it." We looked at each other, not lovers, not even almosts anymore, just 2 people who had carried the same piece of sky for too long. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key from the lamp. "I kept it," he said. "Couldn't throw it away." "Now you can," I said. He hesitated, then placed it on the table. The sound it made was so small it hurt. At the tram line, I waited for the day shift to begin. The rails still glistened. A driver I barely knew waved, asked if I'd be back next week. I told her no, and her smile flickered. People always prefer departures with a return ticket. When the bell rang, I boarded an empty carriage just to sit. The seat creaked its greeting. I looked out the window toward the basilica dome, now complete, its glass patched with silver. Sunlight filtered through it, scattering color across the cobblestones. Somewhere in that mosaic, a blue square still didn't fit. I opened Álvaro's letter. Leah, there are cities that remember their cartographers. When they rebuild, the old lines rise through the new paint like ghosts trying to breathe again. If you ever map Lisbon, draw one extra street, the one between your silence and mine. I'll find it. I folded it once, twice, then tucked it into the atlas sketchbook I'd bought for Porto. The tram bell chimed, not for me, but it sounded like permission. I pressed my palm to the glass window. It trembled under my skin, alive with reflected light. Some things break clean, I murmured. Others stay cracked on purpose. The city moved. I didn't. For once, I let the stop pass me by. Sometimes the world doesn't end. It just changes trains while you're still waving. The train to Porto left at 6:10, sliding north beside the Atlantic like a long sigh. Fog had rolled in from the sea, soft and deliberate. From my window, the world looked half-erased. Villages dissolved into milk, fishermen became silhouettes, gulls were reduced to commas in an unfinished sentence. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and watched Lisbon fade the way salt disappears in water, still there, just invisible. In my lap, the sketchbook waited, still smelling faintly of the workshop, lemon oil, dust, and the kind of hope that sticks to hands. The letter from Álvaro rested between its pages, weightless and impossible to forget. The conductor came by, clipped my ticket, and smiled. "You're traveling alone, yes," I said. "But not lonely." He nodded, the polite kind of understanding that doesn't ask for details. The rhythm of the rails became a kind of breathing. Every station had a name that sounded like something you whisper when you're about to forgive someone. Santa Cruz, Nazare, Álvaro. Each sign slid past, white letters bleeding through fog. I sketched them all. Not with precision, just the feeling of passing, of not owning anything I saw. Somewhere near Coimbra, the fog grew so thick the sea vanished. All that remained was the rhythm of motion, the sound of metal convincing itself to continue. I realized I had stopped waiting for anything to follow me. When the whistle blew, it startled a laugh out of me. It sounded like freedom trying out its own echo. Porto met me with the smell of coffee and river stones. The city climbed the hill like a confession that got out of hand. I walked from the station to the small room I'd rented, a square of space with one window and a view of tiled rooftops that glittered when it rained. The cartography office sat near the river. On the first day, the manager, a woman with hair like seaweed and hands ink blue, showed me the workshop. Long tables, drafting lamps, maps pinned like wings. "We make the world smaller," she said, "but prettier." I smiled. "I can live with that." She gave me my first task, outline the coastline of Portugal by hand. "Don't worry about accuracy yet," she said. "Just follow the feeling of where the land meets the water." That line, "where land meets water," was easier than I expected. My pen found a rhythm that felt almost like steering a tram through fog. Maybe maps and rails were not so different, both tried to keep you from getting lost, even when the destination didn't want you. Days began to fold into each other. I learned the habits of light in this new latitude, the way mornings came slower, the way sunsets carried more purple than gold. I filled pages with coastlines, bridges, and rivers that refused straight lines. At night, I walked to the harbor. The fishermen's lamps floated in the fog like misplaced constellations. I'd lean on the railing and listen to the water breathe, thinking about how sound travels farther at night. Sometimes, I'd take the letter out and read the last line again. "Draw one extra street, the one between your silence and mine. I'll find it." I never wrote back, but I began to draw it, over and over, on every map. A street that doesn't exist, curving between coordinates that never meet. It was a secret only the atlas and I shared. One evening, as spring slipped into the air, I returned from the harbor soaked in mist. A boy from the office handed me a parcel. "From Lisbon," he said. Inside was a small wooden frame. Glass, blue as tidewater, with a single silver vein running through the center. No note. No name. Just the repaired piece, the same blue that had once refused to fit anywhere. I held it up to the lamp. The crack caught the light and divided it neatly into two colors, one half dusk, one half dawn. The room filled with both. I placed it on the windowsill. Outside, fog rolled in again from the Atlantic, covering rooftops, swallowing church bells. I thought of him walking under that same sky, maybe hearing the same weather. For the first time in a long while, the ache didn't feel like loss. It felt like distance doing what it was meant to do, keep people safe inside their own horizons. I turned off the lamp. The blue pane glowed faintly in the dark, its silver scar shining like a map's secret river. I whispered, almost without meaning to, "Encore." But this time, it didn't mean again. It meant enough. Some journeys don't end where they began, but they still send their light back home. The letter from Lisbon arrived on a Tuesday, tacked beneath a stack of newly printed maps. The envelope was official, but the handwriting was not. I knew it before I even opened it, that careful slope, the ink pressed too deeply, as if trying to carve the words into permanence. "Leah, there was an accident in the basilica workshop. Nothing fatal, a fall, a cut, some blood on the wrong color of glass. Álvaro is fine, they say, but he can't hold tools for a while. He keeps asking for your maps. Could you visit, Ana Rodriguez, Basilica Restoration Committee?" The page smelled faintly of smoke and resin. I folded it twice and placed it beside the blue pane on my windowsill. The crack inside it shimmered in answer. By noon, I had packed a small bag and bought a southbound ticket. It seemed I had been tracing this return long before the letter arrived, my hand following invisible lines drawn by a city that hadn't stopped calling me. The train back to Lisbon felt shorter than the one that carried me away. Maybe time folds differently when you stop resisting it? Fog gave way to sun, and the coast gleamed like a confession polished by salt. I arrived at dusk. The tram bells greeted me first, familiar, shy, unchanged. Even the basilica seemed to remember me, its dome newly gilded, its windows alive with evening light. The workshop door was half open. Inside, the air smelled of iron and lemon, and something softer, like surrender. Álvaro sat by the table, his right hand wrapped in gauze. He looked thinner, but his eyes had kept their stubborn brightness. "You came," he said. "I got a letter," I answered. "Lisbon doesn't take no for an answer." He laughed, quietly. "She never did." I looked around. The new window stood completed behind him, an ocean of color held in lead, every seam deliberate. Where the main figure's heart should have been, a pale blue square caught the fading light. "My square." "You fixed it again," I said. "No," he said. "You did. I only followed the map you left behind." He gestured toward a folded sheet on the table, my drawing of the Lisbon tram lines, now intersecting with new silver paths I hadn't drawn. "You forgot this once," he said. I filled in the rest. I traced the lines with my finger. They bent toward the basilica, then branched out into the sea. A network of departures disguised as returns. "I'm leaving again tomorrow," I said softly. "The office wants me to chart the northern archipelagos. They said I'm good with empty spaces." He smiled at that, tired and proud. "Then you'll be famous for absence." "Maybe," I said. "Someone has to draw the parts no one sees." He leaned back, wincing slightly as the bandage tugged. "Do you ever miss the night line?" "Sometimes," I said. "But only the sound it made when it stopped. That's still love, you know," he said. "Even if it's quieter now." Outside, the bells began to ring. Evening mass, or maybe the city just needed to remind itself that time was still passing. We walked to the window. The stained glass glowed alive with the last light of day. The silver veins shimmered, turning every fracture into a star. "I never thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For stopping." I looked up at the blue pane. "You were the one who taught me how." He didn't answer. The silence between us had learned how to breathe on its own. That night, I stayed in a small hotel near the river. The tram passed beneath my window, the sound of its wheels still humming the same lullaby of metal and mercy. I opened my sketchbook one last time and began to draw. Not a city. Not a map. Just a single line, looping back into itself, a circle that never closed. When I finished, I wrote beneath it, "Lisbon, the place where things break and still shine." The next morning, the fog returned, gentle and gray. As the train pulled north again, I looked out the window and thought of the basilica's blue light spilling onto the cobblestones. I thought of his hand, still trembling but steady enough to trace silver into cracks. Maybe that's what we were, two flawed cartographers, charting the places where love had stopped, and finding that even broken glass could guide the sun. The coast blurred, then vanished. But for the first time, I didn't need to drive to know where I was. I closed my eyes, let the rhythm of the rails carry me forward, and whispered, "Encore." This time, it meant continue. Not all maps are meant to lead you back. Some are drawn to let you rest. The northern archipelagos look nothing like I'd imagined. No postcard blues, no bright beaches, only a long hush between sea and sky. From the airplane window, the islands appeared like drops of ink scattered across a gray canvas, half-formed and half-erased. When I stepped off the ferry, the wind smelled of salt and unfinished stories. A man from the cartography team met me at the pier. "Welcome to Graciosa," he said. His accent softened the word until it sounded like grace. He handed me a clipboard and a wool coat. "You'll get used to the quiet," he said. "I've been practicing," I replied. The work was simple, almost sacred. Record the shifting coastlines, trace the contours of waves and fog, draw a world that refused to stay still. Most days, I climbed a low cliff with my sketchbook and sat until my fingers went numb. The Atlantic stretched endless before me, its gray surface breathing, forgetting, forgiving. At first, I missed the city's noises, the tram bells, the rush of people hurrying toward other people. But here, silence had layers. The deeper I listened, the more I heard. The sound of the tide dragging pebbles back, the sigh of wind through volcanic rock, my own heartbeat blending with the rhythm of the sea. Maybe this was what maps could not show, the places that continued inside you, even after you'd left them behind. One afternoon, while measuring the tide markers, I found a small envelope tucked inside my notebook. It wasn't there the day before. The handwriting was familiar, angled, deliberate. The postmark smudged by rain. "Leah, I heard you've gone north. I'm glad. The window looks different now, it lets in too much light, maybe on purpose. The basilica feels less like a wound, more like a scar that finally stopped hurting. I'm learning to draw, badly. Silver lines still tremble, but they hold. I thought you should know, your street exists now. Between your silence and mine, there's a path where the morning pauses first. Stay there as long as you need. The world has enough returns." Álvaro. I sat with the letter for a long time, letting the wind lift its corners. Then I folded it and pressed it between two pages of my sketchbook, next to a rough drawing of Lisbon's coast. Right where the blue glass should be, I traced a new silver line. Evening settled in slowly, the kind of twilight that doesn't decide between leaving and staying. The ocean turned mirror pale. The first stars appeared, scattered like pins through fabric. I drew until my pencil broke, until the cold crept into my sleeves. Then I stopped finally, not out of fatigue but peace. Below the cliff, waves kept returning to the same shore, again and again, patient and pointless and perfect. I whispered, "You win," to the sea, and it answered in foam. That night, I hung the blue pane on the wall beside my bed. When dawn came, light crossed the crack and split into two soft beams, one blue, one gold, painting a quiet cross over my pillow. For the first time, I didn't move away from it. I lay there and let the color rest on me, the way forgiveness sometimes does, unannounced, undeserved, and completely enough. Outside, the first ferry horn called across the water. The world, insistent as always, asked me to continue. So I did. With no destination, only direction. Northbound.